Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Well, welcome everybody to our latest episode. I am joined by Seattle City Councilmember Bob Kettle. Councilmember Kettle was elected to the Seattle City Council in November of last year and took office in January of this year. He represents District 7 on the City Council, which includes downtown and neighborhoods to the north, including Queen Anne. He is the chair of the Public Safety Committee on the Seattle City Council, grew up in Buffalo, New York, served as a naval officer with leadership and management experience in naval, joint service, interagency, and multinational assignments, supporting U.S. interests in Europe, Asia, and Africa. He's been a leader over the last decade with nonprofit and veteran service organizations, served on the board of the Queen Anne Community Council, where he stood up and chaired its Public Safety Committee, and was also a board member of the World Affairs Council. Councilmember Kettle and I discuss police recruiting, the status of our King County Jail, the fentanyl crisis in our community, his first 100 days on the Seattle City Council, what motivated him to run for office, his upbringing in Buffalo and how he made his way from Western New York to the Pacific Northwest, and his first job that he drew a paycheck for. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Seattle City Council member and District 7 Representative Bob Kettle. Thanks for making time for this and your busy schedule on this Friday.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So you're 4 months into the role. How's it going generally? And any surprises from what you expected after your election in November?
Yes and no. You know, yesterday I believe is our 100th day, which is definitely a benchmark kind of a day. And the surprise. I've been engaging with city government quite a bit from Queen Anne Community Council and the VFW in very different ways.
You've had a lot of public service prior to your election.
Yeah, so I have some understanding, but it's really a question of volume. In terms of the meetings, the emails, there is a volume, and you really have to have a top-notch staff. Unfortunately, I do, because it's a team effort, because there's so much coming in. There's so many different issues. And this year with comprehensive plan, we just have the Seattle Transportation Plan, now the MOVE levy, throw in public safety.
Yep.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. What drew you to make the decision to run? Was there a specific moment or conversation or event where you concluded, I'm gonna run for office?
I thought about, obviously, public service. My career in the Navy, and then as I tell people, I married a local girl, so I left the Navy and came here and went to the Evans School, which is obviously a public service kind of piece. So I'm kind of leading into this, and I joined the boards of a couple organizations, not just the Queen Anne Community Council, but the World Affairs Council Seattle, which is important for everybody to know about the World Affairs Council. It's a really important organization. But then other things too, like the VFW and so on. And so I was engaging with this, and of course I had some frustrations working the issues. And so a year ago, almost to the day, next week will be the year that I popped up on the Commission's website as a candidate for District 7. And so I just wanted to work the public safety issues first and foremost. I have a young daughter. I want to have a Seattle where she can grow up safely, and and the rest of us too.
Were those issues, public safety issues and the challenges we face in the city, sort of your principal motivators to getting engaged? And you certainly had experience chairing the Queen Anne Community Council's Public Safety Committee, right? So you were close to the issues. And
yes,
the
8 years of that.
West Precinct Advisory Committee, you served on that.
West Precinct Advisory Council, yes.
Yeah.
So Westpac.
Yeah.
So that combination. And there's the good governance piece too. This is a piece where if you're in the community and you're engaging the city on whatever it is, not public safety, it could be transportation, parks, and whatever it is, and you're engaging the city in one department, and you're like, okay, let's get an answer to this. And that department says, no, you got to go talk to this other department. Right. And then you go to that other department, and they say, no, you got to talk to that department. And then as a council, as a constituent, as a member of the community, you're like, what? And well, here's the crazy thing. In my first 100 days, I had that myself. Council member Strauss and I had two departments in his office. Yeah, so we both had a couple departments in his office and said, hey, we can't have this. And these are the things. And they got it. The two department heads got it. And it's like, this is what we need to do for the people of Seattle.
What were, in addition to public safety, what were some of the key issues you heard on the campaign trail as you were going door to door and at events and town halls? What was the mood and the message from voters?
It was a combination of that constituent services piece. It could be parks.
Good governance, the
good governance. The parks, like we're working on parks issues in D7. Belltown doesn't have a park. So we're working on the Portal Park right now, engaging on that. the Queen Anne, Magnolia, those parks as well. They need work, and so people really care about that. And then there's the transportation issues. When my wife was pregnant, I was driving her downtown, and I was trying to avoid the potholes. So now I'm working with the king of potholes, Councilmember Saka, on the transportation committee. But then when our daughter was born, I had to get a Bob stroller, no pun intended, to navigate the sidewalks. And, so that's a big issue. And that will be a big issue right now for the Seattle Transportation Plan and the move levy, because this is a new council. This is all about basics. I say nuts and bolts. Saka says basics. Hollingsworth is fundamentals, coaching fundamentals and like. And so we're really going to.
Basketball time.
Yes,
right?
Basketball time. And she's great. And, but like Councilmember Moore, Kathy Moore, sidewalks. D5 is missing sidewalks, 1 and 2 as well. So it's like getting these basics done, getting the roads done. I care about bridges. If you think about it, I have a map of 1891 Seattle in my office. If you look at Interbay, there's a lot of water. We have 6 bridges going over Interbay, between Magnolia Bridge and the flyover, the Dravis Bridges, the Emerson, and then you throw in Ballard, Fremont, and the Aurora Bridges, and then the I-5 bridges. By the way, there's one on East Lake, and there's a couple on top of Queen Anne too. D7 is basically a peninsula. And so I care about bridges, and these are the things that we're looking at in terms of working the basics of government. And I think that's what the people want. So that's what was driving, non-public safety issues. Those are examples of what we're doing.
How would you describe the dynamics with your new colleagues? You're all back in the office, as I understand it, which is a different dynamic than the previous council that was working mostly remotely and taking meetings.
It's huge.
Remotely.
That's a big difference, by the way, because we're all in there 5 days a week. There's days where we're out in the district a lot, but basically we're there 5 days a week, and our staffs are. And so we have quick 1-2s where I'll stop in on an amendment on some piece where I say, hey, this is what we're doing, 5 minutes. You couldn't do that.
Walk in the halls.
Yeah, work in the halls. And then my chief of staff does the same thing. My policy director does the same thing. My district director does the same thing, my EA. So we're having this, and this is a huge change, and it really pays. I think it's for the good of the city, and so as you know, I call it the cohort. There's the 6 of us, the 5 that were elected, and then I nominated, and Tanya Wu was selected for the at-large position 8 seat. So we've known each other for the better part of a year already.
You were out on the trail again.
We're out on the trail again. There's all these forums, all these events where we were coming up, meeting each other, and forums at Amazon, doesn't matter. And so we get to know each other. We were working these issues, learning about these issues. Like I had Queen Anne Community Council was a great primer for being a city council member, but still, there's a lot you need to learn on the campaign trail. And we were doing this oftentimes, particularly for me, Tanya, and Joy, and then additionally with Rob and Maritza and Kathy. And so by the time November came around, we pretty much knew each other already.
And you are now chairing the council's public safety committee. Yes. You've held a series of hearings and conversations with some of the city's top public safety leaders. You had the chief and city attorney Ann Davison and others. What did you hear in those briefings and presentations that gave you some level of encouragement, and what did you hear that maybe gave you some concern of where we sit as a city when it comes to the issues those departments and leaders are responsible for?
I have 9 entities under my committee, between departments, offices, and commission, and I wanted each of them to have an opportunity to publicly state, hey, this is who we are, these are our issues, this is our budget concerns, and those kinds of pieces. And one thing I will say is, it is a public safety ecosystem. We need all of these entities to be working together and working, to the full of their capabilities. And so we need to have the city attorney's office fully manned and working, the issues that we have. And the same thing with the fire, and obviously police department is huge on that. And that goes to, the main thrust of our committee, which is the strategic framework, with its 6 pillars to address the permissive environment that we have. But this is an all hands on deck issue, and we need everybody working together, working in the same direction. And, we have to provide leadership as a committee, as a council, but then as a committee. And I think that was missing. I said that, you probably saw it related to the SPD staffing meeting that we had when I had my closing remarks. I said we had to put a line under the defund pledge, because it's so hurtful in terms of the challenges that we're facing today and move forward. And I say this as someone who believes in what we've done with the consent decree and moving forward and reforms and building on them. But we missed an opportunity in 2020 to do public safety and police reform in a different way that could have achieved those goals, but then also not had the negative side effects that we're dealing with today.
Yeah.
Because it's huge and it's big, and we have to address this. And so first thing is like, hey, I'm part of the upper management of SBD, and I'm the leader. Everybody, including here at DSA, you want to be supported by your boss and upper management, in your case, the board. And that's the same thing for the officers. And so, one of the first things I did was with Joy Hollingsworth, we went to each precinct. And I said, thank you for your service.
So the roll calls with officers?
Yes, the roll calls, and saying, hey, this is, what we're doing. And we value you. And by the way, we have the best force in the nation. A lot of this comes out of the consent decree. And I tell them, by the way, and there's a reason why we have the consent decree. We can't forget that. But we also can't forget, and this is the part that often gets overlooked, is that we have made great strides and we've made great progress on the consent decree. And we should acknowledge that. And that acknowledgement means a lot for the officers, but it also means for the other areas of public safety too. And so, I tell them, and I'm going to be meeting on Monday with South Precinct. I will say, hey, I also have high expectations, high standards. I come from the Navy, which is the best Navy in the history of the world. And with high standards and expectations comes accountability in the pieces too. So don't shy away from it. Let's work it. And, bottom line too is that, thank them for the service. It's a very hard job. And I end by thanking their families, their partners, their support system, their friends, whatever it is, because that is so key. People don't understand how stressful a job it is. And I didn't realize it as well a lot of times. Like, 20 years ago today, I was living in Baghdad. And I told my dad last time I left, I was an aide to the Iraq Survey Group. And I had taken off out of Baghdad on a C-130. And I told my dad, I'm out for the last time. My tour's done. And he told me afterwards that he started crying, the whole stress. The stress was just there. And the release, and it was so, like, it just came out of him. And I was oblivious to this because I'm just living my life, in Baghdad and everything that's crazy or things like that. And I don't really appreciate
strain
that.
You're putting on your
I have
family.
an understanding of what these families are going through. Plus, my brother was a sheriff's deputy. It's hard, and so we need to be supportive of them but hold them accountable. But we can move forward on this, and we are. And I should add, there's about 6 or 8 balls in the air right now relates to public safety, and we're pushing on these things. One is like what I was talking about regarding the leadership piece. One is pushing on the budget piece. But third is these other pieces that we're having working. One is we're working with Council President Nelson in terms of working the recruitment and retention process to get better, smarter, faster.
Seattle Times today, right, on that legislation. And so what do you make of just to pause on that and put a finer point on that issue? I think the Times reported 2,000 applicants and 67 hires.
We need to do better.
Yeah. What do you make of the challenges in converting applicants to hires? And then we should mention, I think there were, 97 or 90-something folks who left the force last year. So a net negative in total officers.
Yeah, we're making a move on that. On that point too, by the way, in terms of the point I talked about leadership, you have to make the ask. So I've been making the ask. I said, hey, give us 1 year. If you're looking to retire or transfer to another jurisdiction, give us 1 year. Because we're making these moves, and I can't speak to the SPOC contract here, but that's another piece of this that we're working.
And that'll come before you here soon, sometime later this year, spring.
Soon.
Yeah.
Soon. It's in the SPOC's schedule right now, but soon. And so we have to work these pieces. So that's key to this as well. But we need to, this is part of the oversight responsibilities that we have as a committee, and saying, hey, this is not working. And to the credit to the executive side, they're like, hey, you're right, we need to make some changes here. So this is a partnership piece that we're doing now with the executive team, both SPD and the Office of the Mayor, to work the process of the recruitment, such that, things are doing quicker, the touch points, make the applicant feel wanted, instead of, am I drifting around? All these little pieces, working the physical fitness tests, working the polygraph. There's a lot of things that go into this, and so we have these kind of steps. So each one needs to be looked at. And it's like, how can we make this better, faster, smoother, while maintaining the standards, but doing that. And I think we're making progress on that already. But I think we can make more progress, and this ordinance is going to do that.
And a big part of that, in your mind, is just speeding up the process where you can without shorting standards and requirements. But it seems a big challenge here is how long it takes. And
sometimes
if you're looking for a job, you're looking for a job and want a job. And
sometimes we make it more complicated
Yeah.
than we need to. It's like, reduce the variable, Six Sigma. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
let's simplify this, and let's put some thought to it, not just be rote. We just had a meeting, the mayor, but together with HR and talent and acquisitions people from industry, from local. And so we got some great insight from them too, and just refining these pieces. And so we're doing that. In addition, in terms of like these different things that are in motion right now, we're working with the executive on the vacant buildings. As you know from my strategic framework, I have 6 pillars that are dealing with the permissive environment that kind of give rise to, that things can happen. It's like, no, we don't care, this permissive environment concept.
that erodes public safety.
That erodes public safety. So pillar 1 is, the SPD staffing. 2 is these ordinances, getting the tools, the legal tools and the like, lined up. 3 is vacant buildings and lots. 4 is graffiti. 5 is public health, working with CARE and others, because sadly that contributes to this idea that anything's permissible. If you have, sadly, 2 people leaning against a building and they're bent over at the same angle. I've talked to outreach people who do the health and welfare checks in the morning. It's like, are you still alive?
Yeah.
I mean, that contributes to the idea that nobody cares and anything can go.
Disorder.
Yeah,
we've talked a lot on our podcast about the fentanyl crisis with
Yes.
Amy Smith and others.
Chief Smith, exactly. And then the last one is the county and the state, because county has public safety, public health, and there's issues there that we need to be working with
Jail.
them.
And what do you make of the jail situation?
It's a combination of things. On the public safety side, the jail is an issue. And we need to be really efficient and use it to its
Capacity
and to what its intended need.
Yeah.
And by the way, that goes back to pillar 1. For the morale of the force, the SPD, if you're out there working and you arrest somebody who is a danger to our society and to our community, and then we go to the jail, and then next thing you know, they're walking out.
No room at the inn.
No room in the inn.
Yeah.
Well, there is room, but walking out.
Yeah.
That's an issue. And then the public health side, these 5 care centers, we have to press. I know there's like a certain sequencing, but we have to be on our toes, and we can't have this drawn out. We need to have it now. And
the development of the crisis care centers.
the 5 care centers. We can't have another KCRHA. We
voters
can't
approved this last April, pretty significant $1 billion
about a year ago, exactly.
Investment across the county. And
Yes.
the idea of a 24/7 walk-in.
Because we need that
for mental health
capacity.
crisis.
We need that capacity on the public health side. And as I said, for the last year, we can't succeed in public safety if we don't succeed in public health. They're 2 sides of the same coin. Here's the thing on this too, is mental health. That's a state function. Imagine if we were number 2 across the country in mental health spending.
And not number, 47 or whatever we are?
Well, at one point we were like 46, and the Olympia over a number of sessions have improved, mental health spending. So now I think we're like 32nd. So imagine if we were number 2 like our dogs are in college football. And I could still say this until like August. But imagine if the last decade, if we were number 2 in mental health spending out of the 50 states, what would that translate to in terms of capacity? If we had all these mental health beds right now, what would that do in terms of what we're seeing on the streets?
Yeah, a place for people to go.
So, I talk about all hands on deck here in Seattle. This is an all hand deck on the multiple layers of government too. So it's like, hey, state, we need this. County, we need this. I understand there's budget issues and there's different things that go into this, but it's about getting the job done, and it's about tiger team effort and working together.
Do you want to see King County Public Health taking a bigger role when it comes to the fentanyl crisis?
That's part of their remit. So yes, and they're under a lot of budget issues, and and tied to this is the KCRHA. Let's talk about that. I mean, that's another example that we had a 2-year false start with that.
Do you still believe it can work, or do you think we should shift course and the city should take back responsibility for the homelessness crisis in Seattle?
I believe in the regional approach. I believe it can work, but here's a couple things. We have to straighten out the governance structure. That is my leadership management
3 different boards, 3 different committees.
You can only have one board. Yeah. If you want to bring those kind of aspects in, you have advisory committees. You know this. If you've been to the Evans School, if you've been on boards with nonprofits or MBA 101 in the business world or military, you can't have 3 leadership pieces. You have one. You may have some advisories, but you have one, and that needs to be fixed. And the other thing too is the business operations of it. It is like an MSW work area, but you need some MBAs in there in terms of the business operations, the efficiencies of the contract process, and all these other things. And Helen, the interim, came in. I think she made some positive changes, but now we have to continue that. And then moving forward with our long-term hire for the director position, that needs to be job one. Because if we don't have the governance sorted out, and if there's no confidence in the county in terms of how it's being run from a X's and O's kind of perspective, then the rest of the county is not going to join in. Then it's not going to be regional. And at that point, you say, why do we have the KCRHA? So those are the two main things. I believe in the regional approach, but those are two things that need to be fixed by mid-December.
And are you confident that we can attract a high-quality candidate with a lot of question marks looming over the future of the entity?
I think so. I think so. And, here's one thing. It's like with, with what's going on right now. He's an MBA. And so, so maybe we already have somebody. I talk about
the interim leader.
The interim leader,
yeah.
Don't. Yeah. And I talk about. I don't want to out people, but I know somebody in the King County world whose military background would be great for the KCRHA. And I don't want to say his name because I don't want to put any pressure. But this person, Army guy, who I've met through the VFW kind of process, the veterans, King County veterans process, I think he would be fantastic. But with our current interim, again, I don't care that he played football with the mayor. What I really care about is that he's an MBA. That's important.
We talked briefly about the fentanyl crisis. What do you make of what's going on outside with public drug use and sale and distribution and a record number of overdose deaths and driving significant 911 calls and spending through the EMS system? What should be done? I mean, the council adopted, before you joined, the public drug use ordinance that makes it a gross misdemeanor to use in public. What more should we be doing to improve the current course of this public health emergency?
It's been an emergency for a long time, and it's tied to the homelessness piece too, unfortunately. And that's where, like on the campaign trail, was public safety, public health, and homelessness. And the public health piece, the two hard parts are behavioral health and addiction. And so, it all ties in together. And in this area, I'm working through, as being chair of the public safety committee. And so, the first thing is we need to lead with compassion. We need to start with the empathy piece. I know that you had Lisa Dugard on here. I believe if an officer, selects, comes across somebody using, and that person doesn't have any, charges out there, needs to be remanded for whatever reason.
Warrants and things like that.
Yes, yeah. And direct, Department of Corrections, whatever it may be. That we do divert law enforcement assisted diversion. I do believe that. And I don't have any number on that. It could be 6 out of 10, could be 7 out of 10. But the issue is on that front, by the way, is that those 2 or 3 or 4 that need to go. And to your point about the jail, they need to be there, not go back on the streets where another victim may be, created, which is really sad. But to your point, so we need to start with the, the compassion piece. But then we also have to have the wisdom piece. And this is where we have to have organizations that are engaging with them. And it's one thing to meet people where they are, but we can't leave them there. And we need to meet people where they are and then be proactive on our toes to move them to the next piece. If there's not some type of facility nearby, let's work with them, understand their story. I've talked to providers that drive them up to Oak Harbor. Or on the other side of the mountains, because that's, they're from there originally. It's like
reconnect with family.
Which can be an issue, but sometimes could be the solution. But we need to be proactive and look outside of just Seattle, just King County, and say, hey, how can we engage going back to the capacity issue I was mentioning earlier, how can we do that? And so we need to clean that up. I think we also need to, to work on the ordinances, be tighter on some things, and to work this. And then, we cannot accept where we are, and this actually goes to a different point that I'd like to bring up, because I have a statement that's going to come out related to the 100 days in public safety. And as I'm sure I wasn't there, COVID, but the mayor had his public safety forum. The most consequential moment of that meeting was in the first question. I don't know if you know that. When Enrique Cerna was asking him, he says, yesterday we had a shooting at Garfield High. A young lady was hit, and then just not long after, a woman was killed blocks within, from Garfield. And he was, talking about, he was watching the coverage and talking to somebody from the CD resident, and that resident said, hey, this is just how it is. This is the CD. So this is, an issue that we have, and this is just the way it is. And Enrique said, it was sad to him because it implied that people are just resigned to their place and they just have to accept it. And I reject that. And what we need is leaderships that pushing this. And this is why we have the strategic framework. This is a plan. And this is important for Seattle to know. The committee has a plan, and we're pressing on all fronts. And we're not going to accept this. And we're going to get all the different pieces working together and working in the same direction on this. And this is important. And this goes to the public health side too. Part of it falls under public safety like CARE, but part of it's working with the Housing and Human Services Committee under Councilmember Moore, Chair Moore, particularly in areas like youth and young adult violence, which I don't really want to work with in my committee, but work with her and her committee. And if we have an all hands on deck, again, Tiger Team working together, and this requires the ask of us as constituents, as residents of the city to do our part too. Make that, find it, fix it, make that call, whatever it is, work with your block watch group, create one if you don't have one, but be engaged. Don't be resigned to your fate. And I view it as my job as a council member, particularly as chair of the Public Safety Committee, is that no, you should not be resigned, and this is what we're doing. And this goes to the public health and to the drug piece too, is that we have to engage and we cannot accept, we cannot be on our heels. We cannot meet people where they are and leave them there. That's a problem. And so if that means swapping out providers, maybe not. If that means pressing the state and the county on, like I was saying, on the public health and mental health side, we do it. And we do it in a good way, but the public needs to know that we're falling short in these areas. If they don't know, that's part of the problem too. How do we get a solution? This should be part of the conversation. We're in election year. This should be part of the conversation.
Do you think voters share your optimism that we can make progress on these issues after so much dysfunction and going in the wrong direction?
I think they will.
4 or 5 years.
I think they will. Just look at the council now.
Yeah.
You talk about working well together. We're working well together. But here's another story. You probably know about the Belltown Hellcat story, right? And I'm not going to go into details because that's another thing it's kind of like the spot count. Things are in the legal world and I can't speak to.
But the basics of that is someone driving their car really, really, really fast.
Making a lot of noise, 2 a.m.
107 miles an hour on 4th Avenue. And
yes.
Yeah.
And we cannot accept it.
Yeah.
But people see it.
And they did this for a while, right?
Yeah.
This went on and on and on.
Yeah, went on and on.
Yeah.
So people say, oh, it's accepted. It's permitted.
Yeah.
It's part of the permissive environment. But the residents in Belltown and other parts, but particularly Belltown, were calling in. They were making that call. They were recording it, either the sounds or getting video and posting it. And he was doing it himself, and that's how he made his money, which is incredible that somebody can make money
posting on social media.
And
shenanigans.
And then we were engaging with the West Precinct, and on this really hard. And then we were also working with the city attorney's office. So all of a sudden, good governance. We had the executive, we had the legislative and judicial branches working together, being proactive on our toes.
The community.
Yes, with the community, on our toes with the community. And this is what the community needs to see, that the government is working for them, and that makes them want to engage even more. And so now the judge took away his car.
Impounded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, yes, he can't drive his car right now.
Yeah. Good.
So this is the point.
Yeah.
And it builds.
That's one small example, but of
small
engagement
example.
and coordination and clear focus and commitment by the multiple actors responsible for creating a safe and thriving community.
That's my job. It's the mission. I've been in my office with Chief Diaz, and we're talking about something, and I looked at him because we were talking about whatever issue it was. And I go, Chief, I'm not a politician. He looks at me funny. I go, okay, technically you're right, but I don't think that way. I think as a naval officer, hey, we have a mission. We have the job to do. We need to get the different parts together, and we need to move forward on this issue. And I think, again, not to go into the details of the Hellcat, but that's an example where the different branches of government are working together with input from the community, vital input, by the way, and then we can build on that.
Yeah.
Which is another thing I'll talk about in 6 months.
You've talked about the permissive environment generally in our city that has been allowed over the last several years, and I think negatively contributed to public safety concerns. There was also a permissive environment of kind of bad and disruptive behavior within the city council chambers over many years of people coming in and screaming, taking over meetings, intimidating others. And it was interesting, I know a couple weeks ago that there was a group that came in and was kicked out and banged on the windows, and then you or your colleagues, I think collectively called for SPD to intervene, and they were arrested.
Yes. This is another example of drawing a line. Old council, new council. We're a new council. We're about the basics. We're not performative. We're not about national stuff. We're not about all these different things. We're about local, particularly the cohort, along with the council president, and and others too. I don't want to say it's, but we as a council, this is a new council, and on this point, I should add, yes, the 6 individuals were arrested, and this relates to the refugee asylum issue that we have.
They came to express their point of view on that, but
yes, and
more than express their point of view.
Well, here's the rest of the story. So part of this is federal and state. Why is it being dumped on the cities of King County? That's another story. But they came to us the first time, and they spoke. And by the way, Councilmember Maritza Rivera was translating for these folks. There's recent reporting about how this was done in King County, but they neglected to talk about the fact that the city council did it as well. Then we had another meeting where the group came back again. The Venezuelan ladies came back with a bouquet of flowers thanking us for our support. And then they came back a third time, but this time they were escorted by folks that were working, activists. They were working these issues. And so when they were disrupting the meeting, this is a new council, we weren't going to do this anymore. And
so these weren't migrants, they were sort of activists.
No, the 6 that were arrested were not Venezuelans. They all left when the police said, hey, you need to leave. Or actually before then, when the security was doing it first. And then there was the 6. And there was a couple others too, but in terms of the 6 that got arrested. And they were arrested. So when did we come back? And then we're trying to honor, Senator Fleming way, his family's there. We're trying to do this, for the family and for the community, and we're being disrupted by this group. And so they were already arrested. Then there was, in the ante room, they were pounding on the windows, and I'm the third one in. And Councilmember Moore was saying, I can't hear, and I feel threatened. It was serious. This is not, hey, I'm just exercising my rights.
Yeah.
The amount of force that was placed against those glass walls was huge. I was waiting for them to go. So people need to know that. Yeah, you can protest and do whatever, but the amount of force that was being placed against those glass walls was huge, and I was expecting it to go through. I was getting ready. I was
in council chambers.
In council chambers, I was like, this is going to go. In addition, they were throwing water bottles, which had that kind of extra piece to it, which was very threatening
against the glass.
Against the glass. Yeah. And so that was the point that Councilmember Moore was referring to. This was long after the 6 were already arrested. And so I want to back her up because she's exactly right with what she said when she was speaking to the council president. And I think the people need to understand the sequence of this and the amount of violence and force that was being placed against those glass walls. Seriously, I thought they were going to go. And I think that needs to be understood because after the fact, the different parts were being conflated. Like people, you would have thought that she was talking about the 6 that were protesting earlier and so forth. No, that had already happened and gone. And then there's reporting about, when went to King County and everything was fine and there was translations. Councilmember Barone was translating for Gramai and so forth. And Councilmember Saare. And it's like, as contrast to the city council, totally glossing over the fact that Councilmember Rivera was doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And by the way, the meeting in between, they came with a bouquet of flowers. And so it draws a line under. This is a new
good
council.
On you and your colleagues for drawing a line between civil discourse and intimidation. And
yes,
it's been blurry for too long in Seattle, and I think keeps other people out of the public process and participating.
Yeah, we have to hear all. That's good governance. Engage all stakeholders, and that's what we're doing on a number of issues right now, to include the transportation plan.
Yeah,
we butt out an amendment regarding Pack Place, which is really important because we need to hear from all voices. It's a business community. People forget that, and because it's old logistics, there's no loading docks. Pike Place is it, so we have to engage them. We can't just push in there. I've talked to fire.
The conversation about whether you close off the street to cars entirely.
There was no engagement with the fire department.
The third rail of Seattle politics, right?
Yeah, well, fine. But you know what? They didn't engage with the fire department.
Yeah.
Chief Scoggins, it's like, I need to be able to get in and get out. He tells me, he goes, I can't back the trucks up the hill.
Yeah.
So we need to have a process that engages all stakeholders.
Yep.
And then in addition to the Greenways and the other groups too, I'm not like, hey, let's work this out. We can't impose though without engaging all stakeholders, which in this case is like the PDA from Pike Place Market or the fire department. Can you believe that?
Do you think there's some solution that's different than how it's managed today, where you have a bit more
I think it's
pedestrian access, but you still allow vehicles, emergency, and those owned by vendors to be in that space?
I think we can square the circle, which is one of my sayings I use. But it requires all stakeholders to be there,
listen,
engage, and I think we can do that, and I believe in that, and I'm going to work with SDOT, with PDA, with Greenways, with the fire department, and others to have this. And I bring this up because, to your point about the council meetings and the committee meetings, everybody needs to have a chance to be heard, and previously they were kind of stage managed. They were set up there that everybody that was speaking was coming from one side, and it didn't allow for different pieces to be brought up. And so we need to have an opportunity where everybody all stakeholders can have a chance to speak.
So we talked about our Buffalo connections in the past. You grew up there. I was born there. How did you make your way from Buffalo to Seattle?
Yes. Do many people know that you were born in Buffalo?
Yeah, we don't talk about it often.
You've been outed.
Didn't grow up there like you did, but have fondness for the city and extended family there. And of course, grew up a Buffalo Bills fan through the toughest of years.
Yes.
And Super Bowls, all four of them.
Yes. It's Western New York is a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. Everybody thinks about the blizzards, but they don't see all the beauty in Western New York. And I'm from Western New York because, as you know, my parents are from England, and my dad's eldest sister married a GI after the war, and he was from Western New York. And so he brought his bride back, and then they sponsored my dad in the mid-'60s, and that's why I'm a Western New York. And then my mom came on a fiancé visa shortly after. And that's the reason why I grew up in West New York. I grew up in a very rural, between Buffalo and Rochester. Yeah. And as you know, Buffalo and Rochester, those kinds of cities, you go from urban to rural pretty quick.
There's not farmland.
There's not a big, So picking corn, loading hay, I've done a little of that. And, so that was my...
Your dad was a welder?
My dad was a welder, yes. So, I thought I was middle class as a kid, and then I went to school in Boston, and I realized I wasn't. I'm like, oh, wait, maybe I was a blue-collar working class boy instead. And that informs a lot. And that really gives me a perspective, which is important for this council member job too, because in terms of engaging all stakeholders, I think it's really important to engage the unions and, have their voices heard. And I understand that piece. Obviously I'm talking to the business side as well, but the union piece is really important. And that background of mine informs, when you're a son of a welder, you have an understanding of the trades and the challenges that they have, and usually the lack of voice. And so they need to have a seat at the table. What the final answer is, that's negotiations and so forth, but they need to have a voice and have a seat at the table.
And so how'd you from the Buffalo area, you went to school in Boston, and then what
school? And then the reason why I'm here is because the Navy. I went to school in Boston. I wanted to get outside of New York State. I wanted to go to a big city on the East Coast. So my choices were Boston, Philly, or DC. And I went to Boston, and went to Georgetown later, but for our master's program. But joined the Navy. I was in naval intelligence. I spent about a third of my career in DC because that's the center of the intel world. A third on operational tours, like on carriers, aircraft carriers, command ships on different points, and then and overseas. And so early on, I was stationed in Whidbey in the early 90s. In 92, we deployed first carrier response to Bosnia and Yugoslavia, so I spent the summer and fall of 92 off with that war. But when we're back, I was able to run down to Seattle with the young guys. It was kind of like a fraternity in a way. And I love Seattle. This is the early 90s. This is when Seattle was it.
Yeah,
and so then I was in Moscow. I was an attaché at our embassy. I was a naval diplomat. And my choices for my senior sea duty were Norfolk or Bremerton. And I'm like, I'm choosing Seattle. And so I chose Bremerton. I headed up the intelligence department on the carrier Stennis. And we deployed in 2011 in support of Iraq and Afghanistan. But importantly, I spent the better part of 2010 in the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard which is because I wasn't at sea all the time, allowed me to date my wife, because otherwise I may not be here. And because of that, I came back from my deployment. We got engaged and then married, and I didn't want to pull her in the Navy because she's a very accomplished civil rights attorney with a fantastic legal career, and I just basically passed the 20-year point. And so instead of pulling her into the Navy for a short period of time, I decided to retire from the Navy, come back to Seattle.
She pulled you fully into Seattle, it sounds like.
Yeah, I joined, she grew up in South King County, first at McCord Air Force and then Boeing family. But when I met her, she was a Queen Anner. And so then I became a Queen Anner. And next thing you know it, I'm going to Evans School, volunteering. Most importantly, became a stay-at-home dad. Which, by the way, now we're just talking about my younger days in terms of being a child and young adult. Being a stay-at-home dad gives you so much insight into the challenges that we face. It could be parks, it could be childcare. I'm watching this. We were quite blessed that
How old's your daughter
now? She's a third grader, soon to be 9.
Yeah.
And so seeing those challenges that people faced on, from a childcare perspective, and I'm seeing it up close and personal, and the issues related to children, parks, all these little things, public and pedestrian safety. We're, as a council on Queen Anne's side, we were advocating all the time for Vision Zero, and I believe in this, and to safe streets to school. And so that's why we have a lot of improvements around co-elementary, for example. And we need to do more, and I want to bring that, working with, by the way, the transportation chair, Saka, to the whole city, because it's really important. And being
Kids
that stay-at-home
walk
dad,
to school safely, and
that brings a great insight, and that's wouldn't normally come from
how the city works or doesn't.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm here as a Seattleite. That combination of my youth, the Boston, going to school, and then the Navy, and then having my 2 tours in the region, and then meeting my wife, and here I am.
Have you developed dual allegiance to the Buffalo Bills and the Seattle Seahawks, or does your heart truly live in the
the good
when it
news,
comes to the NFL?
The good news, what the best thing is? The Seahawks moved from the AFC East to the NFC West.
That's right.
I mean, AFC West to the NFC West. And so you have the NFC West with the Seahawks.
Root for Bull.
And you got AFC East with the Bills. And so they only show up like every 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
And I think the 12 would love the Buffalo Mafia, the Bills Mafia. and the Bills Mafia, in respects to 12. So I think we have a mutual appreciation fandoms between the 12s and the Bills Mafia.
Did you grow up going to Bills games?
Yes, I've been to a number of Bills games. I'll tell you another story offline sometime about a Bills game, because as you imagine from the stories about the Mafia,
it's a rowdy bunch.
It's a rowdy bunch.
Yeah, I would go back every Christmas growing up, and so usually go to a game, and it's often a playoff game in early January because we were there through New Year's, and
So when I go home,
freezing, you're standing out in the frozen tundra of the Rich Stadium parking lot, or what's the name of the stadium now? It's not Rich Stadium.
Highmark.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you go back at that time of the year, usually you're going to a Sabres game too.
Yeah.
And I've told Todd Lewicki that I did grow up in Western New York, but I'm definitely supporting the Kraken. But it's just, I think you can do both, so I think it's great. And by the way, I've told him as well that I'm definitely a big hockey guy. My Boston University, unfortunately, lost yesterday in the Frozen Four to Denver. So top hockey team, in college, and the Sabres, and I look across the lake at the Leafs, the Maple Leafs, and so forth. So I'm really excited with the Kraken. But I did tell him, though, the Kettle family, it's all about the Seattle Storm. So we're really excited about the Seattle Storm.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to promote that, and not just because of the current women's March Madness, but before then. I think it's that's partly what you get when you marry a Title IX expert and you become a girl dad. But I think it's important, and we should promote this equally with the Kraken and for the girls and young women in our community, that hey, these sports are here. These are things that you can do. And the soccer with the rain too. And these are things that you can do, as opposed to like when I was a kid. The opportunities were a lot less. So I am so happy, again, as a former stay-at-home dad, girl dad, that we have these opportunities for our girls and young women in our city.
Yeah, my daughter has drawn me into women's college basketball as a Iowa fan and Caitlin Clark fan, and what a great show they all put on in the most recent tournament, and no doubt that'll translate to more interest in the WNBA.
We're Caitlin Clark fans too, although my wife would have me say, fear the tree right now. But unfortunately, Stanford didn't get very far.
Yeah.
And we've been to the UW games too, which is fantastic.
They're terrific.
It's fantastic.
Easy to get there from downtown too on our train, which is phenomenal.
Yes, exactly.
A basketball game or a football game. We've got a couple of questions we conclude with, council member. One is, what was your first job? Was it picking corn outside of Buffalo?
No.
The first job you took a paycheck for, we should say.
Well,
so not like under the table or.
Yeah, a lot of that farm work is kind of like, here's 20, here's some money on the side. Well, being a paper boy, I was 10 or 11. I started with a paper route. Yeah. So does that count?
Were you delivering in the winter?
Yes. Whew. And it's really bad when you break this finger and tendon on this, and you're walking around with 2 splints, and all you have is like this flimsy mitten on because you can't wear proper gloves, and you're out there, delivering. When I came back, I thought I had frostbite.
Were you delivering the morning edition or the
afternoon.
afternoon? Yeah, back when there was an afternoon edition.
Yep, I was doing that.
Was this the Buffalo News?
No, it was. Well, initially it was a Rochester Times-Union paper, and then Batavia Daily, the Genesee County, which Batavia Daily was the main one, and I did that for the most. And then later a grocery store. So I guess the proper paycheck could be a grocery store.
Was there ever a day you couldn't make your route because of the snow?
No, because you just did it.
You just did it. Yeah.
That's what people don't. Yeah, see, you just do it. That's the old joke about going
spirit.
Through snow, uphill both ways and that. But I've literally walked to or from home in blizzards. Fortunately, I didn't live far from the school, but I mean, literally. But you just did it. I mean, 6 inches, 12 inches, 18, you just...
Yeah, the city doesn't shut down.
You just do it.
Except for those 5 days last winter. Were you there over the holidays?
No, when it's coming down in multiple feet, that's a different thing. And again, blizzards don't hurt you unless you got a heart condition and you're out there trying to shovel snow.
Yeah.
Or being stupid with your car, and you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, my mom got stuck there with the airport shut down for 4 or 5 days last winter, and I think my brother-in-law slept in a bar somewhere, and he got the good end of the deal. But what a time. Anyway, our final question is, what's your perfect Saturday in Seattle? Like if you could design it from morning till evening, what are you doing?
I think I have 2 answers really, and I think one is the family. We really enjoy we're members of the aquarium. Just going down to the aquarium and be able to go down there. If you're a member, it's easy.
We got a new one on the way here in August.
Yes, I'm very excited about that. And and we're a book family. My daughter reads books. My wife, and she takes after her mother, thank God. Elliott Bay Bookstore, just going in the Elliott Bay Bookstore, walking around, getting a coffee, that's a great way to spend a Saturday downtown, and something that definitely encourage. And then the other part of the answer too that I was thinking about, because I've been thinking about the World Cup a lot, is when I was stationed in Bremerton, I would come over on the ferry and go to Fado's and watch the 2010 World Cup. Watch the England team, and and go to Fado's and the Owl and Thistle, and just take in the game. Or another day, go see the Sounders, the Mariners, those kinds of things. And I've been pushing the World Cup. I mentioned it yesterday at a Puget Sound Regional Council meeting on transportation. I said, hey, you have to understand this is real and this is going to be big.
And you have experience.
I've experienced
of going to a few of these.
Yes, I've been to Germany in 06. 94, I saw a match in DC, and it's huge. And so I look fondly back on going to Fado's and watching with all the England supporters the 2010 World Cup in South Africa. They didn't do particularly well, but it was such a great atmosphere, And so my goal, by time FIFA 26 comes around, is that Fado's, or a business like Fado's, opens up and can serve, the community, the soccer / football community,
and be part of your great Saturday.
So that's my goal, John.
Yeah, I love it.
And so let's get those or an Owl Thistle around the corner. I don't want
as someone who's been to a few of these. Do you think we fully appreciate what's coming in June of 2026 when World Cup lands in Seattle?
No, that's why I made my comments yesterday. And it's not just the games, and as you mentioned in a previous podcast, the base camp piece. Because I've been following this with the England team. And by the way, you can have tons of reporters, never mind the fans. Yeah. And they're there for 2 or 3 weeks.
So when a team comes to train prior to
get set up for the World Cup.
Yeah.
And if we get a team like England, which would be my preference. But, think about it. Brazil, Argentina, if they're here for 2 or 3 weeks, the amount of fans, the media, and all the rest, it's going to be huge. Yeah. It's not just the games themselves, and the day before or whatever. Like when a team comes in for like the Mariners or the Seahawks or the Kraken or whatever. No, it's much broader than that. And then you throw in like this base camp thing. It's going to be big for the entire period. And you talk about all hands on deck. We need it all. Yeah, because it's going to be big.
Can't wait. And I think as Peter Tomazawa talks about, in soccer, you're not a spectator, you're a participant, and that's the spirit and fever of World Cup.
You ask about weekends. It's a bigger World Cup, as you know, compared. But there's
more teams.
The opening round has 3 weekends: the opening weekend, the middle weekend, and the closing weekend. So there's 3 weekends in 26 where, to your question, how would you like to spend that Saturday? Watching those matches, or better yet, going to them, at whatever ones that may be here.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get England versus the U.S. We know the U.S. will be here.
And as I think I told you, I'm definitely supporting the USA, but I like to avoid that matchup.
There you go. Well, thanks for making time for this. I thought it was a great conversation. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of ground, and it's refreshing to hear about your approach and the approach of your colleagues, and to see the leadership you're bringing to critical issues in our city and to the council. So thanks for your service, not just in stepping up for this role, but your service in the community and to the country, our country, prior to that. So really appreciate you making time.
Well, I appreciate for having me, and thank you for this service too, because this is a great education for people. When I was a candidate, I was listening because I was learning about downtown, District 7. And so thank you for doing this, because it's important to get the word out to the community on all these topics, to include what we've been talking about today. So thank you.
Love it. Well, thanks for that plug. Really appreciate it. Well, thanks to Councilmember Kettle for making time to join us on Seattle City Makers, and for being so candid in the conversation we had on a wide range of issues. Appreciate his extensive community and civic leadership, and for him making a decision to step up and run for office. Not an easy thing to do nowadays, whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, and appreciate that he's put himself out there and committed himself to a continued career serving his community. So thanks, Councilmember Kettle, for your leadership and for making time. As I do each and every episode, I want to highlight a few things here to check out in downtown Seattle that have recently opened or recently announced and soon to come. And I've mentioned before that Sweet Greens, the terrific veggie salad grab and go, although I think you can sit down and dine in there as well. But it's got a strong following. Many people know Sweet Greens, and they are finally open in downtown Seattle over there at the corner of 8th and Lenora, across from the great new park there that the Seattle Parks Department developed a few years ago, which they just added a terrific new children's play area that I think is almost open as well. So go check out Sweet Greens. And then also wanted to highlight the great news from our friends at Bumbershoot and Clay's Properties that was announced in April, that Bumbershoot will be taking over the 60,000 plus square foot former Bed Bath & Beyond space over there at 3rd and Virginia. It's been vacant since 2018, and this time next year will be home to a music venue and visual art and a whole host of wild and zany things that Greg Lundgren, Joe Paganelli, and Steve Severin, the 3 individuals behind Bumbershoot, both bringing Bumbershoot back to the Seattle Center campus and all that Bumbershoot will now offer throughout the year with a headquarters in downtown Seattle in the former Bed Bath & Beyond space. They are bringing forward some great things to our downtown and a lot of great energy around arts and culture and music, and it's going to be great to have that space activated. So congratulations to them and the great folks at Clay's Properties who helped make this happen, and to Liz Dunn, the chair of the board, who also serves on the board of the Downtown Seattle Association, who's been involved in helping bring Bumbershoot back to the Seattle Center campus and make it much more than it ever was for our city and our downtown. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.